You went on to say, and this group were not ISIS fighters. So
I think
what information did
that.
Minister?
Feel free to have
I haven't finished my question. I haven't finished my question, Minister. What information do you have to satisfy yourself that neither of these adults who've returned have committed any terrorism offences and were not ISIS fighters?
This was supposed to be boring. That's the part no one tells you. A routine Senate hearing, a few prepared answers, a few safe headlines. Then everyone moves on. But instead, Australians watched a senior minister calmly talk himself into a corner and then stay there. No yelling, no theatrics, no viral meltdown. Just quiet questions, careful pauses, and answers that didn't quite line up. If you care about who gets brought back into this country, if you care about national security, or if you've ever wondered whether ministers actually understand the weight of their words, this moment matters to you. Because what unfolded inside that room wasn't just awkward, it exposed something deeper, something unresolved, and something the government still hasn't explained. Before we go further, pause for half a second. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments, not for engagement, for context, because this conversation doesn't exist in a vacuum, and what happened next made that painfully clear.
Well, as Ms Foster has said, I think they are questions that should be directed to the security agencies who are in a better position to understand what should and should not be put in the public domain.
But you just told us moments ago these people were not ISIS fighters. How did you know that?
Well, no. Feel free to go back and have a look at the transcript. I'm pretty sure that's not what I said.
Well, I'm pretty sure it is what you said, and we'll get that transcript and I'll provide it to you. I'll quote it back to you directly. So are you now saying you don't know whether or not these people were ISIS fighters or not?
The point I was making was that what we know from this question on notice is that the 40 returnees, at least under the coalition government, those who came under between 2013 and 2017, included some who fought for ISIL, some who've not fought but provided support to ISIL, and a few who had joined other Islamic extremist groups.
And then you drew a distinction between that cohort and this cohort. So what was the information you were relying on to make that distinction?
I can't add anything to the answers I've already given you.
Because you don't know?
Because I've already answered your questions several times.
Was it just a speculative comment that you made?
Feel free to have a look at my earlier answers.
Were you making an assumption because of their gender that they weren't ISIS fighters? What was the reason?
Feel free to have a look at my earlier answers.
Well, Minister, it would be very helpful if you could just explain to me what the basis of your statement was. Have you been briefed on this matter?
If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. And to everyone already subscribed, thank you for the support.
The question on notice that was answered back in 2017, 2018, where under a coalition government we saw around 40 people who had fought for ISIL and joined other Islamic extremist groups who returned to Australia. That was the basis for my statement.
Yes, but you were also commenting on the particulars of this cohort and the difference with previous cohorts. So I'll ask again, have you been briefed on these matters?
Personally, I had a briefing from the Minister's office to prepare for estimates, but that's the extent of my knowledge.
And in that briefing, did they tell you whether or not these returnees had committed any terrorism offences while they're offshore?
The information I've given you today is based on the briefings that I received. And any further questions about the detail of these returnees should be put to security agencies.
It started with a distinction, a subtle one, the kind politicians love. Minister Murray Watt explained that the latest Australians returned from Syria were different from previous groups. Different how? Earlier returnees, he implied, included ISIS fighters. This group, 2 women and children, did not. On the surface, that sounds calming, almost comforting, and that's exactly why it worked, for about 5 seconds. Because distinctions like that aren't neutral. They guide how the public thinks. They suggest risk has been reduced, that safeguards are stronger now, that this time things are under control. And if you're an Australian listening at home, you probably felt it too. A quiet relief. OK, maybe this isn't as serious as it sounds, but reassurance only works if it's backed by facts. And that's where the problem began. Because one senator wasn't interested in vibes, or implications, or carefully worded comfort. He wanted something much simpler: evidence. And once that word entered the conversation, the tone shifted completely. But before we get there, quick check-in. If you've ever felt politicians speak around issues instead of through them, tap the like button now. Not for the algorithm, for recognition. Because that feeling, it shows up again very soon.
Right, so I am none the wiser as to where you got your confidence that these returnees are different from the previous returnees.
Well, I'm sure the security agencies will be happy to provide you whatever information they can when they appear later today.
Okay. You also said that there are persons of interest in this cohort. What about them makes them persons of interest?
Well, again, I wouldn't mind seeing what I actually said. What I think I said was that our agencies are aware of who the persons of interest are in this cohort.
Okay, so tell me about that. On what basis are they persons of interest?
I'm not a minister who turns up and breaches national security rules.
Well, not deliberately, I'm sure, but you might have inadvertently.
Feel free to put those questions to the security agencies when they appear.
Okay, here's your direct quote. I'm going to help you here, Minister. You said, "These 2 women and 4 children, it is worth remembering that between 1 January 2013 and 16 October 2017, almost all of which was under a coalition government, we saw returnees from the conflict in Syria and Iraq number around 40, according to that question on notice. And in fact, they were not women and children, they were fighters. They were ISIL and ISIS fighters who returned. So I think some context is probably useful in this debate." So can you confirm where you became confident that these women are not in fact ISIL or ISIS fighters?
I don't think the quote that you just read back has me saying that. I think you're trying to. I think you're misrepresenting what I said.
You just said that they were. You referred to this cohort as 2 women and 2 children, and then you said this other cohort you're talking about were not women and children; they were fighters. So, is it because of their gender that you've made an assumption that they haven't committed a terrorist offence?
No. You're misrepresenting what I said. What I said is that this group are women and children. I said that group that returned under the coalition, many more, I might add, like 7 times as many, at least, were fighters. That's what I said.
Yeah. So
you're trying to conflate what I've said, and I haven't made that point that you're trying to.
What is the relevance of the fact that they're women and children, if not to distinguish them from ISIL fighters? You think that you appear to think that's a meaningful distinction?
Again, you can try and conflate different sentences to make a point that you want to make. What my statement is factually correct. Feel free to read it back out.
Minister,
Feel free to read it back out.
Are you aware whether or not any
and then
women...
everyone listening can judge whether you're conflating it and misrepresenting
Thanks, Minister. Are you aware...
You don't want to read it back out?
Minister, are you aware whether any women have fought for ISIS?
Oh, I think historically it's known that some women have fought for ISIS.
Okay, so explain to me then the distinction that you were drawing between these returnees and those ones.
Feel free to read my statement back.
Okay, all right, we can do it again if you want. I think it's on the Hansard record, but let's do it. These 2 women and 4 children, it is worth remembering that between 1 January 2013 and 16 October 2017, almost all of which was under a coalition government, we saw returnees from the conflict in Syria and Iraq number around 40, according to that question on notice, and in fact, they were not women and children, they were fighters. They were ISIL and ISIS fighters who returned, so I think some context is probably useful in this debate. Why is their gender relevant? What's the distinction between an ISIS fighter, whether they're male or female?
I was just giving you a factual statement that the 6 people we are talking about here are women and children.
Yes.
I was giving you a factual statement that under the coalition government, between 2013 and 2017 alone, 40 people returned who were ISIL fighters or members of other terrorist organisations. They are factually correct statements. If you want to draw conclusions from that, that's up to you.
I think the conclusion's pretty clear, Minister, but let's move on to other areas.
Assistant Senator Hanson. Senator Paterson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few moments ago, the Minister drew a distinction between this returning cohort and previous returning cohorts by saying some of those previous people were ISIS fighters and these ones were not ISIS fighters. So can you confirm for me that there is no evidence or suspicion that these people were involved in any acts of terror or other terror offences while they were overseas?
Senator, that is an operational matter that would have to be referred to security, law enforcement agencies, but I can say not to our knowledge.
Right, well, so the Minister was able to. So there's no suspicion that either of the adults in this cohort committed any terrorism offence while they're overseas.
Senator, I'm very conscious that I don't know all of the information that might be available to security and intelligence and law enforcement agencies, nor whether or not any future investigation or prosecution might take place, and therefore I think it would be not appropriate for me to speculate about that. Those questions could go to them and they could make a judgment about whether or not
and they will, but you just
answer.
said in your previous answer you don't believe so. So just to be clear, they did not commit any declared area offence by being in a declared area while they're overseas?
So, Senator, what I said was not to my knowledge.
Yes.
But those questions are best addressed to the security, law enforcement, intelligence agencies.
What about associating with the terrorist organisation? Are we seriously saying that ISIS brides were not associated with the terrorist organisation, which is a crime under the Criminal Code?
So, Senator, I've said that I don't wish to do anything that would prejudice any future investigation.
Sure, but the Minister just told us these people were not ISIS fighters. They're different from previous cohorts.
No, what I said, what I did was read out to you a question on notice that was answered relating to the 40 returnees from the conflict in Syria and Iraq between 2013 and 2017 under the coalition government, and the answer to that question in notice said that that 40 included some who have fought for ISIL, some have not fought but provided support to ISIL, and a few who had joined other Islamic extremist groups.
And
Senator James Paterson didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't editorialise. He just asked the question Australians at home were already forming in their heads. Is there any evidence or even suspicion that these adults were involved in terrorist activity overseas? It wasn't hostile. It wasn't dramatic. It was obvious. And for a moment, everything paused. Minister Watt hesitated. Then came the answer. Not to his knowledge, but, and this is where eyebrows started rising, he quickly added that such matters were operational for intelligence agencies, not something he could speculate on. Read that again in your mind, because moments earlier he had sounded confident enough to publicly distinguish this group from previous returnees. Now suddenly he didn't know, couldn't say, wouldn't say. That's not a minor slip, that's a contradiction. And contradictions don't disappear when you ignore them. They invite follow-up. And Paterson didn't miss the invitation. Before we continue, if you're still watching at this point, type "still here" in the comments. Not everyone makes it past the first tough question. But the real discomfort hadn't even started yet. Here's the core problem. You cannot do both. You cannot reassure the public and then retreat behind ignorance. You can't confidently suggest reduced risk and then claim you're not briefed enough to explain why. That's not how trust works, and Paterson knew it. So he pressed again. Were these individuals involved in terrorism offences? Were they in declared areas? Were they associated with ISIS, an association that, under Australian law, is itself a criminal offence? Each question was precise. Each one closed another escape route. And each time, the answer retreated to the same place. He didn't want to prejudice investigations. Intelligence agencies were better placed. He wouldn't speculate. But the damage was already done, because speculation wasn't the issue. The issue was this: why speak with confidence if you can't defend the basis for it? That's when the tension in the room shifted. You could feel it. Not explosive, not dramatic, just heavy, like everyone realised they were watching something unravel in slow motion. And then something even more uncomfortable happened. At one point, Minister Watt insisted he hadn't said what everyone had just heard him say. That's when Paterson did something devastatingly simple. He pointed to the transcript. Read it again. He said he would, and then he quoted it back. No spin, no interpretation, just the words. And suddenly, this wasn't a policy discussion anymore. It felt like a courtroom cross-examination. Because once your own words are used against you, there's nowhere left to hide. The minister struggled to explain the basis for his earlier distinction, not because he was interrupted, not because he was attacked, but because the logic wasn't there. And then came the question that shifted everything, the question that made the room go silent. Paterson asked whether gender had played a role in the assumption that these returnees were not ISIS fighters. It was brutal and completely fair, because here's the reality, and this is documented, not controversial. Women fought for ISIS. Women recruited. Women enforced rules. Women participated. Ignoring that isn't progressive. It's dangerous. Minister Watt rejected the suggestion outright, accused Paterson of misrepresentation, but when asked to clearly explain the distinction he himself had drawn, he couldn't. Again and again, he returned to the same line. This group consisted of women and children. Previous cohorts included fighters. But when pressed on why that mattered, why it was relevant, why Australians should feel reassured, there was no answer. Instead, he said Australians could draw their own conclusions. That was the moment many watching at home shook their heads. Because national security isn't a guessing game. You don't leave it to the audience to fill in the blanks. Either you know why the distinction matters, or you shouldn't be making it at all. If this moment surprised you, drop a comment saying that line was wild, because what happened next proved Australians were paying attention. The response was immediate. Within hours, social media lit up, not with memes, with questions. Veterans groups questioned the government's messaging. Community leaders called for clarity. Australians outside major cities, already feeling disconnected, asked why ministers seemed unprepared on issues with real-world consequences. Even inside Labor circles, there was quiet frustration, not ideological frustration, competence frustration. By the next afternoon, the opposition wasn't even framing this as a political win. They called it an embarrassment, not because of policy, but because Australians expect ministers to understand the implications of their words, especially when talking about terrorism, intelligence, public safety. And just when some thought this would blow over, it didn't, because allies were watching too. Australia has spent years projecting firmness on counter-terrorism, consistency, clarity, control. Allies notice when that image cracks. Analysts read transcripts, briefings get compared, statements get dissected. When a minister can't explain the basis for his own public distinction, it raises uncomfortable questions. Was he underbriefed? Was the messaging rushed? Or was the distinction never solid to begin with? That's what made this exchange so damaging. Not one wrong sentence, a pattern. Confidence without evidence, distinctions without explanations. Reassurance followed immediately by retreat. By the end of the hearing, Paterson didn't need a closing statement. The silence did the work. And that silence echoed far beyond the room. A week later, Australians are still asking the same things. Who exactly are these returnees? What do we know? What don't we know? And why did a minister speak so confidently about a distinction he couldn't defend? Because here's the real issue. If the government can't explain this clearly in Parliament, what confidence should you have that the system is working behind the scenes? That's why this moment matters. That's why it hasn't disappeared. And that's why people are still talking about it. Before you go, answer this honestly. Did this exchange reassure you or make you more uneasy? Leave your take in the comments. Share this video so others can judge for themselves. And subscribe, because moments like this don't come from nowhere and they don't end when the cameras turn off.